This is a pack of tarot cards. They were created in China, and they feature the art of A.E. White. On the back it says, you see the Chinese imbued these cards with magic. And you can tell that they're magical because they're holographic. Today I am going to read to you an essay, but I figured while I was doing so, I could also give you a tarot reading.
Abstract. This essay defines the term postmodernism theory using Fredric Jameson's 1991 book Postmodernism, or The Logic of Late-Stage Capitalism, and compares this definition to the spiritualist movement in 19th century America, as well as the contemporary paranormal investigator or ghost hunter movement, which this essay asserts share the same intellectual tradition. The sources are varied, with statements from believers, non-believers, and neutral parties. Historical references are based on verified history, in the form of one article and one study. Rather than a deeply researched analysis of postmodernism theory, its application is limited to the understanding of the author and is used as a tool to critique the anti-empiricist nature of ghost believers. Ghosts, or the spirits of the dead, are a feature of many human cultures throughout history. Before modernity, the belief in ghosts was based in a rational effort to explain various psychological phenomena, which contemporary science has all but proven conclusively. As if in response, spiritualist researchers and ghost hunters developed rationale to excuse the failure of science to prove the existence of various supernatural phenomena related to ghosts. This rationale, proliferated through modern media, has become the foundation of today's ghost myth and exemplifies what is called postmodernism theory. Postmodernism as a concept has varying definitions, but often describes a society's response to the materialist sciences of modernity. The theory of postmodernism generally reflects the widespread adoption of what scholar Fredric Jameson calls anti-foundationalism, and the creation of self-reinforcing ideas that ask impossible to prove questions. The lack of proof thereof becomes proof of itself. Another feature is the need to define the current era as one which requires us to abandon the current system for something ominous and exhilarating. Jameson claims this to be a cultural product of the development of the global capitalist economy. This ideological landscape fosters a pluralism of named theories. In simple terms, the anti-empiricist nature of postmodern thinking allows every person to have their own theory of the world. This is encouraged by capitalism, which turns culture into a product in its own right. Ghosts, as they are understood today, and the logic of those who believe in ghosts, reflect these descriptions of postmodern thought. In a short 2021 New York periodical, the author briefly outlines the history of spiritualism in the United States. It initially gained popularity due to the antics of young girls, the Fox sisters, who would produce rapping sounds for an audience and claim the sounds were the result of a ghost communicating with them. Spiritualism was bound to performance. Seances were a primary practice, where a medium would sit surrounded by a paying audience and channel the words of whichever spirit they claimed they had reached. This was the job the Fox sisters performed for 40 years, before one of them admitted to their whole career being a con and even demonstrated the method by which the fraud was perpetuated, a cracking of the joint in her toe. Their specific method is called spirit rapping, and whether or not the ones who popularized it admitted to it being fraudulent, even revealing the mechanism by which the trick was played, didn't matter. Spirit rapping and the theory of seance were untouched, and the example became the exception, but also the proof for its existence. Another practice of the early spiritualists was spirit photography. which involved the imprinting of mysterious figures in the background of photographs. Famously, the wife of President Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln, had a spirit photo of her taken with her late husband after he was assassinated. Jameson's descriptions of postmodern media describe exactly the function of spirit photography. He describes spiritual exercises and meditations as pre-capitalist media products. The modern age represented the material realities of capitalism. He describes modernist photography as the redemption of physical reality, while describing postmodern photography's purpose being to elaborate an autonomous vision which has no external equivalent. The ghost, which only exists in the photo, is summoned into the viewer's mind and is both informed by and informs the collective fantasies of the culture industry. It should be noted that these photos were a product sold by spirit photographers as mementos. The development of spiritualist ideas, like in the case of spirit photography, relies on the relationship between people and poorly understood new technologies. While the technologies of those early days may seem rudimentary to us, modern devices are more mystifying, displaying to us the effect spirit photography must have had on contemporary people. For example, the EMF reader is a popular device used effectively by electricians to detect AC currents behind walls, and less so by ghost hunters and researchers alike to detect small electromagnetic fields created by wandering spirits. Termed apocryphal media by researcher Matthew Bernico, a belief effect can be produced by a device when put upon by impossible expectations. The EMF reader produces the effect of detecting the supernatural, rather than actually detecting the supernatural. This is similar to Jameson's description of how postmodern thought turns into its own theory and a theory of itself. This inclination to believe is a human one, and isn't necessarily conscious. A 2022 study found that even non-believers would distance themselves when told that there was a spirit haunting the corner of a room. Interestingly, atheists were more likely to sit further from the haunted spot than Christians. This might point to a cult or alternative religion aspect of spiritualism, which Jameson points out as a product of postmodernism theory. Some have even argued that the process of ghost hunting, such as in TV shows, is a spiritual practice, positing that spiritualism is steadily supplanting institutional religion because of a wider rejection of institutionalism. Others go as far as to argue that spiritualism is, in function, no different than old religion, and words like supernatural and cult are stigmatizing. Of course, while the search for the truth about the afterlife may be an earnest one, only one afterlife can exist. Traditional ones can be accepted on historical, pre-modern grounds. The overlooking of this essential empirical boundary of logic when developing brand new religions reflects Jameson's assertion that postmodernism cultivates a pluralism of named theories. Jameson, quoting Weber, also describes how the conditions of postmodernism create new religious values, in turn creating new postmodern people who are very adapted to a very peculiar socioeconomic world. One final aspect of postmodernism theory, as described by Jameson, which is relevant to the subject of ghosts, is the weakening of historicity. Postmodernism theory forgets the past while being referential toward it. As an example, during the First Indian War of 1675, New England colonists beheaded rebel Wampanoag Captain Anawan, then displayed his head as a warning to other rebel Indians. The site, named Anawan Rock, stood as a regular historic place of interest before being included in a 1994 book called The New England Ghost Files. The author of the book described local stories of people who saw the ghost Anawan calling for his killer, a deceitful colonialist captain named Church. Yet, a folklore study could find no local tradition of ghost stories for the site, stretching back more than 150 years. This spectralization of indigenous people, as the study describes it, could also be seen in the earlier days of the spiritualist movement. Since the creation of this postmodern myth, paranormal researchers regularly visit the site and have created a whole body of increasingly mystical stories about Anawan Rock. Spiritualists, or ghost hunters, or paranormal researchers, whichever term they assign themselves at the moment, could surely disagree with this thesis on the basis that ghosts can be measured by science, and aren't a product of mystical denial of empirical truth. In a scientific article published in the Journal for Spiritual and Consciousness Studies, a spiritualist journal, the author argues that ghosts and apparitions are a natural phenomenon that can be explained by new postmodern physics. While the term postmodern is explicitly present, a generous reading of the author's argument is that science should develop new systems to detect the supernatural. The author also claims that the history of supernatural belief should be enough evidence to indicate that the supernatural exists. While possibly compelling, this argument still reflects postmodernism theory, which Jameson says is a speculative question. An empirical answer is that none have so far appeared. Because we haven't disproven ghosts, there must be a way to measure them that we haven't discovered, but we don't even know if ghosts exist to be measured, and some studies even seem to indicate hauntings are actually psychological phenomena. Okay, and I'm going to pause right here just to say to you, the audience who's listening currently, I'm also going to put a disclaimer in the final version of the essay, but I was forced to do recent sources right through the college search system. So some of the sources I used to make some of my points aren't what I would have used in an ideal circumstance, because they wanted stuff that was within the last year, like studies in the last year. And so this is a newer study, but it's not a perfect comparison, and for that I'm sorry. Okay. A 2019 study found that symptoms typically associated with hauntings are strongly correlated with the recent phenomenon of gangstalking. A 2025 study found that gangstalking is a cultural concept of distress, basically a mental illness, which is heavily informed by environmental factors and even supported by like-minded communities. It could be that the belief in ghosts, now a traditional one, was at the time mental illness greatly informed by grief as it surged in popularity through the Civil War and World War I. Those who are more familiar with postmodernism, or the source book specifically, may contend with these comparisons on the basis that this essay misunderstands postmodernism theory, or even that the effort to analyze postmodernism theory as some kind of unique part of human history is unfounded. One may recall the assertion earlier in the essay that spiritualism is like any other religion, just new. Jameson himself wrestles with these ideas in his book, and to quote him, "I have pretended to believe that the postmodern is as unusual as it thinks it is, and that it constitutes a cultural and experiential break worth exploring in greater detail." Further, in this context, where postmodernism theory represents a rejection of empirical truth, and ghost believers reject empirical truth, any outside definitions or analyses of postmodernism would only serve to confuse the audience and dilute the thesis. The response of culture to the globalization of capitalism, postmodernism, has fostered a web of intricate beliefs, all suspended in the rejection of shared truth. The belief in ghosts and the spirits of the dead is one that has been with humanity since the beginning. But postmodernism has redefined the process, rewrote the myths, and modified the reasons for this belief. While ghost hunters and spiritualists may disagree with the notion that ghosts cannot be empirically proven, their most scientific response, to expand the laws of science to include tools to measure the supernatural, assumes the existence of something which modern science has yet to discover. Ultimately, the survival of these mystic beliefs beyond the age of reason was enabled by capitalism, which commoditized the very belief of the afterlife itself. So, my biggest critique of this essay, and also the weakest rebuttal that I had in the essay, is that it comes across as what it's trying to critique, right? It almost feels like it itself is postmodernism theory, at least as defined by Jameson. And there's a lot more to postmodernism that I don't understand and I don't know about, and even the way Fredrickson talks about it is almost divorced from postmodernists, like in France, and it almost feels like it is itself also a piece of postmodernist theory, right? I could be completely wrong. My biggest critique is that I don't understand it really that well at all. This was an essay I wrote for English, so it's technically properly done, as in all the claims are sourced. But as for the main argument of the essay, I'm not sure I actually agree with it. And I think that I would need to learn more about both the ideology it's critiquing, which is postmodernism, and Fredrickson himself, and how he is actually related to these topics. I know he's a professor of linguistics, I believe. So I don't know if we're talking past each other even. He mentioned symbolic interactionism, and that's probably the one thing I actually recognize in the book. So yeah, that's my biggest critique of this essay. I hope you all enjoyed me trying to make it a little bit more artistic. Thank you.